interpretation is not an icing on the cake, nor is it a betrayal of the written text. The notation is the emanation of the author's intent. It's up to us to bring it alive, beyond its time capsule. It's universal, from the instrument to the ways of listening to music today, which is with less patience for repetition or terms of endearments or recapitulations. The form was part of the meaning, and not only a GPS through the piece, it was also a restatement, a sense of syntactic persuasion. It was eloquence or simple sense of common decency in music, or in voices in polyphony exchange among equals, or an accompaniment harmonically, possibly motorically, also rhythmically or pulse-wise, codes a melodic theme. Could it be just imitation of a song without lyrics through the piano, of an imagination of a string quartet with decay of resonance delayed by the pedal and the instrument compared to the earlier keyboard instruments, where you can have so many voices be expressed at the same time, and dividing your attention to articulation, phrasing, pulse, direction, line, pedaling, phrasing, layering of horizontal lines versus vertical chordal sandwiches or slices of ongoing lines, and how you define the pace and the pulse compared to the meaning and the indication, either in words or either in after 1820s metronomic marking, which is more objective for beats a minute, how many, but beyond that, the feel is so important, because you wouldn't play music unless you feel it or you think you felt it, perhaps through misguided reading, perhaps through ideology in interpretation from other performers, until you find your own path. How the teacher is hyphenating the composer's intent and DNA of thought processes for the student who discovers the piece, and the piece starts living or blossoming with the life that the performer brings to it. The eye of the beholder becomes the ear of the beholder, and it travels through life with you, and you can change your opinion or see other aspects appear in it, which is not necessarily the case for the composer, who might have, in the case of many 18th, 19th century composers, died relatively young, to not say prematurely young, even to their standards of living expectancy. So what would have been the late works of Schubert, Chopin, Mendelssohn, Weber, leaves us only to daydream. It's not about not acknowledging the wonders that they left us, and in order to regret what they didn't complete in the, let's say, life experience of their own on earth, where they also were influenced by their time zone in which they existed. They didn't choose when they were born, nor did we, and therefore the fact that an interpretation is considered as an element of the performance today seems to be a little bit of superficial nature, because it is true that the essence should go on the surface. The purpose and the meaning of the compositional narrative storytelling psychologically suggested, since in piano music by essence there are no words or lyrics, but there are ways through so many highlights that you can bring or not, and how much and when and where, affects from appoggiaturas to suspensions to secondary voices, which highlight but shouldn't obliterate the point of the statement. In fact, the rubato comes as a variable of adjustment on top of it all, not because you don't consider humbly enough that the text is it, and therefore we are craftsmen of a text which is superior to us by its conceptor, and we have just to serve it in order for it to blossom back to life from the written text. And without our subjective involvement, it's very difficult to define such a boundary philosophically and as well as aesthetically. Not to mention, in all honesty, it's difficult to speak of honesty because art by essence has an aspect of artifice. It's a recreation of life, recreation of elements that are part of our being. A representation, if you want, of the mystery of the being, of the uplifting expectations of a spiritual transcendence, as well as the human exaltation through singing, dancing, as well as the, of course, need for praying and basically sharing. Would it be with big audiences in a hall or individually like we do today through electronics? And the recording industry with the published editions in a way popularized that individual and individualistic approach to the art, instead of being the one communicated to the masses by few leaders whom we trust and perhaps distrust. After all, we have these great music editors or piano gurus like Cortot, like Casella, who were as well as many others tainting through their own point of view the Beethoven sonatas and editions, and then the students of students would teach to their students the tradition of how it's supposed to be done. These are elements which all we sort of capture, and at some point we are obliged to choose, pick and choose, either by our conviction, either by our obedience, perhaps both. Perhaps also by the fashion of the day about how to play a repeat or not, or differently or the same way. What is its purpose? Why do composers need to restate something? Is it a term of endearment? Is it a term of reassessment? Are they question marks in music in terms of the punctuations and between the harmonic progressions and the tonics and the dominants and the subdominants and all kinds of cadences that give us a delay ending, even if the music is not readable tonally, even if it's atonally placed in a limbo where you feel like you don't know where it's going in terms of there is no gravity or gravitation towards something which appeals to you as a leading tone to a tonic. But let's say that most of the composers before atonalism didn't need it and to express themselves as they were in their own time periods, which means that they found most of the time in the so-called tonal system, that they didn't call so, but in the grammar rules of the syntax that they were given, enough to express their own personality through their own creativity, to write their own novels without to imagine a new alphabet. And therefore, it is possible that it is an artistic undertaking to rethink the matter before you even develop it. It's not necessary to consider that some are followers and some are revolutionaries who reject to rebuild or to create a niche. In fact, all of these beautiful, meaningful endeavors were responding to inner calls of these people's psyche, of these people's intellects, of these people's awareness of their past. Be it today, we have way more awareness of the past in music history than they did in their own past because of the lack or hardly easy access to a lot of the information of scores or recordings, of course not, but nothing but scores. And so they had a skewed view of a certain way of the past. Today we could develop musicologically such knowledge in detail about niches that we would consider so, but the niche to the one is the essence to the other. So it's not at all condescending to say all that. And all these thoughts come to mind when I teach, when I play, when I think, when I compose, when I want to translate and transmit what I think is the meaning, not of the piece as it's supposed to be played because of the way I hear it or think it or believe it, and excluding the others at all. As a matter of fact, I find it very meaningful to give the student a large choice to build their own. It doesn't happen overnight, not even, alas, during their studies time, because it's something that macerates slowly until it becomes part of your statement when you play it. Even if others played it before you and others will play it after you, it's your turn to play it for what it means to you, what you understand of it, what you feel like. Of course, you cannot pretend you're discovering it because of this overwhelming information of famous pieces being played by so many and the way they hear it or the way they played. Then the technique is a response to the inner quest about the way you're going to organize the structural gesture, and the phrasing therefore will call for the fingering that will be best for the individual morphology of each hand, which is what I try humbly to do in teaching it to each student, and not applying a fingering or phrasing approach ahead of time. I'm very carefully listening to the student's inner voice, calling them to do certain things, aware or not of it, or why, or most of the time not aware of it. Is it intuition? Is it gift? Is it just some kind of magnetic connection with the music language of a given composer's statement? Because there is a sense of appropriation. You feel like, oh, this is something I feel comfortable in. I can develop this and I can make it mine, as they would say. Of course, that's where we come back to the meaning of interpretation, because for many people, interpretation is something that you should not even interfere with the piece with. It should not be you over the piece or filtering the piece, but the piece itself through you. And well, it's a little bit of a play of words on semantics, because in fact, without individual involvement, you don't get to be convincing. And even if you're telling a line as a theater actor, after all, there should be a rupture of disbelief so that the spectators who watch you, hear you, see you, believe that what you represent through the character whom you play, literally represent, and are not, but become during that lapse of time, you become the vehicle of that character's destiny in terms of where and what it means to be this character. And then of course you have artistic directors, and you have teachers who tell you don't overplay, don't underplay, space the words that way or the other way. There's no rhythm indication in how you tell the text of the lines that you're supposed to make your own and not appear to only repeat, which you basically do, but with a conviction, which artists like opera singers who sing in a foreign language phonetically, they know the meaning of the words, but they don't live with these words with all the connotations of them as it is for the mother tongue, where immediately a tenderness or an insult takes a dimension that is profoundly traumatic, or enhancing the ego, or hurting it. Whenever if you say words in another language, it's already a bit more remote from this primary connection that comes from this mother tongue that came through the ear, like music directly to the psyche, which you repeated when you spoke in echo to what you were told. And then when one day you learn how to read and write it, then you start thinking about what you say and how you say it and how others said it. And therefore, to a certain extent, you don't need anymore somebody to read to you the text. You can read it by yourself. Of course, you might misread it or not understand it the way the author intended it, or as commonly the knowledgeable people would think you should be understanding it. But you have access to it. Again, the alphabet, the language, and of course the phonetic and the emotional and the intuitive comes from the ear, for music as for language. And then once you forge an awareness about subtleties in syntax, subtleties in, and then if you master another language and you start organizing, understanding relatively so the subtlety of the meanings of things that all of a sudden traveled in another language and changed the meaning that they carried. All this is enriching yourself. Of course, you could get lost in so many thoughts when you just have to learn to play a piece. Practicing alone is relatively boring for most pianists because it's to a certain extent repetitive. Why? Because repetition helps learn through the cognitive memory, finger muscle memory, some kind of autopilot element of the performance, which allows then the brain to be the conductor thinking ahead what you play while the fingers play it. And so you are yourself the alpha and omega of the piece. You're ahead like the conductor, a beat ahead, pulling yourself towards the end of a phrase before the next, and how you organize that structure while you have to play it as the musicians of the orchestra who follow the conductor. But at the same time, you have to choose a plan before you start, while you practice, how you want to go through the piece. And of course then the technique betrays you when an instrument on which you play is heavier or has uneven keys, or you try a pianissimo and a note doesn't play, or a one that you expected to be soft sounds loud, and all of a sudden it breaks all the plan that you had so carefully imagined in your inner world imagination, daydream, how you imagine it. And if it doesn't match in the reality of the performance, then you start getting almost off-road, as if you are thrown off of the horse or away from the train, and the train continues and you're just on the floor and you're just abandoned, saying, oh, what? This kind of things happen also with muscular memory for the finger playing for the piano action, since you don't have to find pitches like string instruments or wind instruments, intonation. It's all preset, but you have to organize the level, the speed in which you depress the keys and how you organize the fingering. So there is an element of industry of playing. Of course, editions, as I said earlier, Schnabel for Beethoven, Casella in Italy, or Cortot in France, and others would give you a lot of information how to do it. But your teachers also give you, and at some point you think, okay, this piece means so many things to so many people, or it meant to others before me, and I am now with this piece. Perhaps I should just play something nobody played, or perhaps I should play something I come up with, which is most of what in the 17th, 18th century the performer composers did, because they were both by essence and the performer and the composer, and therefore the very concept of interpretation didn't exist, since it was the producer who was the presenter. Now, sometimes that wasn't the case, like Schumann with Clara, his pianist, or Brahms being played by Clara. Liszt and Chopin played themselves their productions at best in their own time to make it known. But besides that, Scriabin, Rachmaninoff, of course, are superior pianists. But the piano is not only an instrument, it's an instrument that is evocative of so many things, from orchestra to itself, to voice, to sacred or secular. In other words, we travel in time, we travel in styles, of course, through the time periods, but also in genres, and the evolution of genres through time periods, and how they are stylized between the Baroque dances and the Romantic era dances, or the modern period folkloric dances that are the folk music of countries that have strong folklore. And therefore, there is always a purpose to the statement in which you realize the music is nested in. Would it be an intellectual context, French Impressionism, Symbolism, Russian Expressionism, and then we have all this incredible evolution of the Western European civilization, which creates a lot of its own musical expression for its main topics about how they envision death or after, how they envision hope, how they envision guilt, how they envision longing, and how all this is translated subtly in musical terms, not necessarily depicting it per se as would be only sound painting, but psychologically hinting it rather. And of course, it depends who is on the other side of the receiver to catch that hint, who can receive an inner voice missing or an inner voice enhanced, not knowing about the inner voice in the first place unless they can read the music, in which case they might, like I said earlier about the alphabet reading, they might not need a person to play it for them. They can read it and they don't need anybody to be the interpreter of the piece. And sometimes then they relate to one interpreter and say, oh, I love such and such playing Chopin only, or I like Liszt only by such and thus. And this is natural, and I guess it's very healthy. The question is, what is the percentage of the written text alone? How much definition does it give us for every aspect of the statement presentation, or the way we carry this narrative message, and how we think that we are right compared to others being wrong, or compared to us being differently right later in it, think, oh, I should have this, I should have that, as if it's a gift that keeps on giving, and you realize that the aspect that you saw when you learned it, either for technical difficulties, either because you didn't know much more about music when you learned it if you were very young, then having since discovered many other pieces of music, it highlights the meaning of some of the phrases. Not that you cannot say that with 7 sounds, it's bound to have a lot of pieces in tonal system sound alike, because it's almost a probability situation there that brings us to similarities that can be thought-provoking or amusing or just endearing. But if it's serendipitous or purposeful, it doesn't matter. The point is that it is there for us to deal with, for us to serve it, for us to mean it, for us to find what is that connects to our own sense of understanding of what it is supposed to have been. And because the literal meaning of interpretation is translation, etymologically, we translate something from a written to a sound, alive text, and therefore the notation alas, unless some people might, of course, disagree with this, leaves room for, if not doubt, different ways to approach it. Either the composer gives grace notes, unmeasured situations, or leaves in the notation things that could be understood differently. And not just for the pleasure of being provocative or for the pleasure of being different or by some kind of gratuitous statement of attitude, you know, to me this is that, and it's because everybody else does it this way, I want to do it the opposite. Unless it's a conviction, in which case it's rambunctious and, of course, wonderful, but also difficult to swim against the tide, as they say. But I respect a lot of the different approaches, which I might not share, but which I cannot not acknowledge, either when I am in a jury of a performance of performers of high caliber, or with colleagues of high caliber. We can agree to disagree, inevitably, because there is always room in the text when you play it to bring something other than what somebody else has seen in it. And these boundaries are very subtle because it's a magic of the charisma of a given performer who tells you the same text with their own way. And the type of rubato, regardless if it's too much for the taste of one listener or judge to another, is more convincing, and the same type of rubato in another performer doesn't fit in their own playing. Is it the touch that is to do with it, the quality of the phrasing? There are so many aspects that come into mind when you think about it. The instrument is industrially constructed, the piano, but different pianists touch it and they manage to bring different or convey different colors. There's almost different orchestrations. Like you want to go hear a given symphony you love, you heard in recordings, and then all of a sudden, instead of the oboe solo, is a clarinet solo. For some reason, you get a little bit destabilized, and you're like, oh, I'm not supposed to be like that. Or why not? Or I'm not allowed to do that as a conductor. I'm here to play the piece as orchestrated by the composer or the arranger. And in this case, I find that the pianists, as C.P. Bach used to say, fantasieren am Klavier instead of spielen. That's not play, but fantasize, imagine on the keyboard, is to do with the idea that even if you play a written text, it has to sound, in fact, as if it is your own text, just like the line of a theater actor. It's a very subtle fact because the teacher is placed in a position between the student, future artist or present artist, and the composer, who's most of the time not around. And let's say the composer was around. God forbids. That's wonderful. We'll be in big trouble because perhaps we love the way we play their music in a way that they wouldn't have liked. But we love perhaps to betray them with conviction and love of their music. Perhaps there isn't a only way for a composer to consider his or her work being played other than the way they conceived it. After all, the parents conceive a child, and then the child develops its personality, and then in the path of the seasons of the child's life, they meet people with whom they have connections who didn't see this child at birth, unlike the parents. And in a way, they see other elements of the child that perhaps the parents don't see, blinded by the fact that they saw it at birth. And I find to be the case when Schumann dies after composing so much in so little time, and Clara survives him almost 40 some years and plays so much of his music. And it's only when you perform a composition in front of an audience, or many times, that the piece starts living its life from the concept, from the composer to the performer, if it's not the same person. And even if it is, and in this case it was not, it's possible that had Schumann lived long enough to have heard Clara play his music for another decade or two or three, in different occasions, as some composers who lived long did, he might have rewritten aspects of it, of the same piece, not only other pieces, as of course, hopefully so too, but to make new versions of what they did, because in light of the performance and the audience response, it's difficult to know who decides what. Of course, the composer is sovereign. The performer after the composer is at a sort of like a recreational crossroad of the piece, which doesn't belong to the performer, but it's almost borrowed or rented. I don't know what is the most appropriate, at least loved during the time of sharing with an audience. And then that path in life is also filled with the philosophic understanding of the world, through which we perhaps see this other piece that comes from another time period, of another way of understanding their world. And do we just take it on the surface for the effects that it brings us, or the effects that it does on us? Or is it something that we try to enter into the soul of the meaning? You know, what are those repeated notes such way, or why is this tempo bringing me more drive, but I lose articulation? But then at which point do I decide how I can play it at best, or what I consider be best, and when am I cross because I messed it up and I practiced so much repetitively to get to it, but I betrayed myself and my practicing to get to that point? This is truly pianist journey, and I'm accompanying so many students' pianist journey for so many decades now, that I find it very meaningful to give them the intellectual and musical and practical technical tools to reach to their own conclusions, from which they'll build with possibly a hybridation of the different influences over the interpretation of the piece. I find it difficult to log them in one truth versus others, because the very concept of truth is wrong in this case, since there is no objectivity in it. It's all subjectivity that connects us to spend so many hours of a lifelong seeking the inner sculpture of a phrasing, the inner sculpting of that phrase, how we get to deliver it to the point of which it matches our own inner construction of what it's supposed to mean. And between the filter of the understanding and the filter of the performing and the filter of the emotion to play in front of people versus alone, the fascination is the score itself, the music, the written, the only element to which we go back to, because the student and the teacher stare at us, at these notes, and say, oh, this is supposed to be this way on the beat, before the beat, the grace note, the trill on the upper note, but the real note, and which sound, no, it's Baroque, no, it's not Baroque. We are filled with rules that are given to us by classes that teach us how to organize the understanding of the written text. But once if we've done this very deep work of archaeological almost aspect of digging the piece's message that we are trying to play, the teacher is there in a position where you see the seeds of the garden that will blossom later, and you feel like you cannot shortcut, and you shouldn't even imagine that you have a remote control or a shortcut or any kind of artificial aging of the process, other than the natural maceration of the elements through the intellect and through the emotion and through the technique to reach it. And ultimately, it's so rewarding to see that we can spend so much of our time to serve a text that means so much to us, as if it's our own life depending on it. And then the listener, in this shared escapism moment, enters in interaction with the performer while passive, apparently, and the performer is active by essence of the industry of playing. Conductors do mostly the structure because they don't play the sounds. The orchestra musicians are more the fingers that the pianist has, or the feet for the pedaling. The element that I find federates all this seeking is, what does it mean to me to play this piece? Who am I pleasing? A teacher, a parent, a competitive drive compared to others? Perhaps a combination of it all when you're a student, but then beyond, or even before, or in any case, through. As the philosopher often says, the purpose of the trip is the trip itself. But that's something that you only learn when you age with the trip. The aim, of course, is the attraction that gives you the drive forward, and that brings you back to the practice room in the loneliness of repetitive practicing, section by section, voice by voice, dissecting every articulation, note by note, putting it back together, and hoping that this time your physical, emotional, and psychological state will allow you in the next performance to deliver it correctly according to your expectations, which is a lot of preparation, and repetitively so, which is exhausting too, for psychologically, concentration wise, not to mention physically, but also purposely. If you sink in the detail, you don't see the point of it. You could give up. and that would be logical actually. But the beauty of it is that it means to you so much that you go back to it. Because in the performance, it's only one time through, just like life. You don't rehearse in life, you live life. You plan it when you wake up in the day, how you're going to go through the day, and then the unexpected happens and you deal with it. Or not, well or badly. But that's what happens with the performance. You idealize it in the preparation for months, years, and probably a whole life, where you put all the meaning of music in each note that it's in your life. And you feel like you lose the sense of proportions of things because it's so silly. Why does my life depend on this, 12 minutes of a Chopin piece, which has inside it a whole world, a whole universe, besides the language and the style and the genre of a given composer, that reflects a whole tradition and a whole tradition. And so many words come to mind and none nails it. Perhaps I'm not able to find it, but I would say that it's humbling, really truly, to help students build their own inner pantheon of what they want to reach in the piece, through the piece, for the piece, in terms of what is the goal. And of course, as a teacher, you have to help them reach it and how they would reach it. Mostly teaching them how to practice, because that's repetitive. And performance is one time through. But you have to think ahead, perform through, organize, divide your thoughts in so many ways in order to manage so many elements in the given texture of a piece. The opposite of a group where you have to, as a conductor, if it's an orchestra, for instance, you have to unify all these thoughts into one brain, collective one that brings the piece to shine of all its instrumental colors. And in the piano, you have all of these elements, but dividing rather your concentration to the point to which you follow one, you might lose the other, you catch it back. And the only reassurance is that it has to mean so much to you. And when it does, I think then you're convincing to an audience, either of knowledgeable people who might have their own opinion about the piece, you can't make them agree, or some, not perhaps fully either. But what about these people who just want to be told a story, a narration? Like they want to read a novel or to discover a film or storytelling. And who might not know the details of the one you play, who might not understand what is the point of it, but who in their own way will be brought to it through you. So you as a performer, then you have this responsibility to make them love not only the piece but the universe in which it's nested, and how the structure of it brings the purpose and then the meaning and then the elements and what is enticing and what is it's just so wonderful, at the same time terrifying for the performer when they're so aware of all what the piece contains and they don't want to betray it or betray their own preparation of it, probably both. And that's where, as a teacher, I have to be moderating this by pushing them to their limit, but not beyond, because afterwards it becomes an obsessive, destructive situation where you only see the defects of the details, but you never see the construction of the whole, since you're digging your own hole while practicing every detail. And all the details aligned do not constitute the whole piece. The whole piece has to be a gesture from towards which you it's like an arch, and then inside it you carry all the elements instead of the elements carrying you through the arch. I mean, it's a little bit playing on the words, but it's important always. I seek always that sense of balance for the student between those who aren't enough into the detail and those who sink in the details, and find how individually help their individual seeking. It's not about second guessing them, it's more about imagining in their place what will be my major worry about. Would be a memory slip, a technical slip, something that taints the idealization of the piece that we have in mind before we start playing it. And we cannot restart endlessly either, unless in recording, but not in performance. But even so, it's never twice the same way. And one thing leads to another. One detail reaches differently a phrase, which then communicates differently to the next. And then the unexpected happens. And in some ways, you have to expect it, in the sense that you have to deal with it as if it's planned. It's easily said than done, because you have to go beyond the disappointment on the spot and accept to be quickly adjusting. So how can you react so quickly in real time to so many elements that you have to manage and control, if you can't at least appear to, is the hearing, the awareness of the text, and the sounds that you produce, the inner hearing for what you project, and the monitored hearing from what you produced, and how that clashes or harmoniously glides. And sometimes you're lucky and you feel like, oh, for a few bars it was just went like I was hoping. The cruelty and the fragility and the vulnerability of life, while its strength and its own inertia forward, it's incredible. Thank you.